So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it. Hey guys, so before we get into today's video, I want to tell you about what may be the most interesting lecture series I have found about the evidence for the claims of the church. It's a channel on YouTube called LDS Truth Claims. Brett McDonald presents 32 lectures covering all of the positive evidence for the church, and also deals with essentially every major objection to the church's truth claims. Brett does this systematically with attorney-like rigor. I actually listened to his entire series over a couple of months while doing the dishes. It really helped me realize that saints often never consider how much positive evidence exists for our claims. I highly suggest this series to all Latter-day Saints. Just search for LDS Truth Claims on YouTube. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's show. Tonight, I am joined first and foremost by my co-host, Hayden Carroll. Hayden, how you doing, man?
Good to be here.
Awesome. And we are joined by our special guest tonight, Michelle Stone. Michelle, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Well, let me give a little bit of background to the audience as to what's going on tonight and kind of what we're going to talk about. So I learned about you through the Midnight Mormon show. Had seen that you had been on there and talked about some things. And then all of a sudden in an episode, you brought up some critiques of myself and Hayden and some of the things that we've been doing online with regards to kind of some of the stuff that Julie Hanks has put out and our critique of that. And anyway, I'm a big believer in if somebody wants to end up on this show, one of the best ways to do it is to go offer a critique, because I'm really big on like, hey, if you have something that you disagree with me about, like, I'd love to discuss it. I'm very big on kind of getting people together who disagree and then not necessarily finding consensus, but fleshing out the differences. And when you watch two people flesh out the differences, a lot of times those can be the most interesting conversations.
Great.
So anyway, hoping to do that tonight. And yeah, so why don't we, do you mind if we just dive right into the clip of some of the stuff that you said on that Midnight Mormon show, and then we can kind of discuss it?
Sure. Do you want to start with a little more of the background first, how this all came about, or do you just want to dive in first?
Why don't you, from your perspective, give a little bit of background on how this came about?
Okay, I will. And I do want to point out, like, I appreciate you being willing to talk to me, but I want to point out, I did reach out to you guys to talk about it too. Oh. So I don't want to, I didn't come kicking and screaming.
Oh, no. And I think we both probably mutually were reaching out about the same time, because I had the exact same thought. I think had you reached out to Hayden?
Yeah. So that's what I was going to talk about a little. So Hayden, we've never met. This is the first time we are conversing, but Hayden's dad is my cousin. So Hayden's grandma and my mom are sisters. And Hayden's dad, Carlos, and he's quite a bit older than I am, and they're big families. So actually, it was at my brother's funeral just last year that I got to sit down and talk to Carlos, and I just felt like he is the best guy. Like Carlos and Hayden's Uncle Vance, and my sister Diane and I had a conversation, and with a few other cousins, and I just was like, those are good guys. And so that's a connection. I have so much just love and respect. I was thankful to get to know them a little bit better, because like I said, we haven't, I've known Vance a little more, but I haven't known Carlos as well. He's a good guy. So I appreciated that. So then it was surprising, because then I started getting some comments on my Facebook that were like, hey cousin, hey, and I was like, I've never met you, and it was kind of it felt a little to me like, it
creepy?
felt a little like, what?
Was it creepy?
No, it wasn't creepy, but it felt a little like that. Hey, we're best buddies, and I'm going to undermine and kind of say things about that you shouldn't be in the church. And I'm going to kind of ask people if they think you should have a temp recommend. Well, I'm saying, hey, we're cousins. That's how it felt to me.
It's interesting. I feel like you get so much traffic on your videos and your Facebook posts. And to be honest, that was my way to try to get your attention to say, hey, let's talk about this. We can do this in love and in understanding. Anyway, I think that connection can help these conversations. So anyway, that's why I brought it up. I think we're technically first cousins once removed is the technical term.
Exactly. Yeah, your dad and I are first cousins. Yep.
Yeah, so.
I have no idea. I have no idea how the once removed stuff works. I just, when you're not a first cousin, you're just another cousin.
Yeah.
Anyway, I appreciate your willingness to chat with us. And that's what I was going to actually say. And we talked about this before we started. And I'm pretty sure Jacob plans on linking, Michelle, your podcast and your links.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I really appreciate about you is that you're willing to have conversations with people that you disagree with. You've been on Midnight Mormons and they disagree with you on a lot of things and agree maybe. More recently, you've had Brian Hales on your show, which he adamantly disagrees with you, right? And we saw that if you saw the video. But anyway, just thanks for being willing to talk, because I think this is how ideas get fleshed out, and it's so beneficial. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, so that's what I had just wanted to say is that when so it was Midnight Mormons that sent me the link to your video with them. The same night that I learned, one of my friends messaged me and was like, does Hayden Carroll have a podcast? Because I had been telling her, we'd been talking about this, and I was like, oh, I don't think so. But I looked it up and I found, Jacob, your podcast and saw your debates together. And I was like, oh, these guys go together. And then it was at the same time that I saw the Midnight Mormons where they were talking about you and brought up Hayden and brought up Julie. I was like, what's happening in the world? So that's why.
Together.
Yeah, that's when Cardin said, well, we'll come on and talk about it. But I did reach out to Hayden before I even went on Midnight Mormons. I was like, hey, let's talk about this. Because but then I guess a lot of things happened. So it's been a couple of months since I first reached out to Hayden to say, let's talk.
And maybe what happened was, I do have my own podcast that I started during COVID. I have about 20 episodes on it, but I haven't posted for like a year or two. So
I listened to your first one with your dad.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's been a while, but maybe that added to the confusion.
Very cool.
So anyway, that's how it all came together. That's how I didn't set out to go, Cardin, I'm going to talk to you about this guy named Jacob. I didn't know about you until
I actually didn't see it that way. I kind of figured once you get in with Cardin, it's like all of a sudden
it's a big happy family.
All of a sudden you start meeting all sorts of different people. And anyway, it's kind of a small little Mormon media sphere world that we're all kind of playing in.
Sure. And I hope he doesn't feel like we're leaving him out, but I will say that 2-on-1 is good, is okay. 5-to-1, I don't know if I'm up for those odds.
Well, and Hayden and I talked beforehand. We want to make sure that this doesn't come off as like a dog pile, a 2-on-1 kind of thing. We want to make sure we let you flesh out your arguments, offer our thoughts and critiques, but we don't want this to, it's not what we want. So
that's great. That's how I like to engage as well. I don't like the gotchas trying to win. I like trying to share ideas.
Yeah, so let's try and flesh some stuff out. So all right, well let's dig in here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull up actually real quick, just a little side note on something that you did say in one of the videos. Was about the name of my podcast.
Yeah, and if I was wrong on that, I apologize, but that was the first thing I noticed.
So it's funny. I had no idea. I knew nothing about A Thoughtful Faith, and it was funny because once I started getting going, all of a sudden somebody reached out and was like, "Hey, you got that name for?" And I was like, "Oh, well, shoot. I already did the logo."
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for telling me that. I hope that. I did say I don't know for sure, but it felt to me like because I've known about A Thoughtful Faith for a long time, and I just barely learned about your podcast, so it was easy for me to make that assumption. But I appreciate you clearing that up, and I'm sorry to make the assumption.
It's all good. It's all good. Believe me, I'm sure I make mistakes with things that I say. And if I do, I want people to kind of correct the record. So anyway, So real quick, we had made our video kind of critiquing a conversation that Julie Hanks had with Bridger Coburn on his podcast. And this was some of the stuff that you had kind of said about it. So I'm going to come here to timestamp. What is it, about 33:40? And yeah, we'll just kind of get into it and listen to your thoughts on it. So I'm going to mute my mic and then open this up.
Of having to defend the other side. You know, I think that we have a war going on. And my whole thing is, hey, it'd be great if we could stop launching nuclear weapons at each other. That would be great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's stick with bunker busters. You know what I'm saying?
Or, you know what? I feel like it's so easy to become bloodthirsty, like the Nephites and Lamanites in the Book of Mormon. Like, well, they did this to us, so we're going to do this to them. So we're going to, you know, and
that's
like
not
the
what we should
Elder
do.
Holland, what did you say?
And that's not what we should be doing. Yeah.
Right. And so for me, I look at the messages that Julie Hanks is giving, and I can see where I think, oh, I would say that, I would clarify that, I would add to that, right? But I look at what Jacob Hansen is doing, and I look at the fact that both of those guys on that podcast claim that they've been in bishoprics. And I will say this, all of them, all of you, and most of their listeners and your listeners with the comments we're getting, can and will be called into positions of church leadership, bishops, stake presidents, whatever else.
I don't think I'm ever getting there.
Well, those two already have been. With all of the cumulative wisdom, understanding, gospel knowledge, inspiration, compassion that Julie Hanks, or any other woman in our lives will accumulate, we will never be judges in Israel. We will never be the ministers of a flock. And so if we want to claim that women are equally represented in this church, it is incumbent upon those guys to not just criticize and condemn and lambaste and bludgeon Julie Hanks, but to get in and go, what are the struggles?
And to be better
Why
listeners.
are people resonating with her message?
So,
And I'll tell you, their approach is what's leading people out of the church. It's their approach that makes you go, if that's who Mormons are, they can have the church. I'm out. And they said repeatedly, like, sorry, you don't like it? Go. You can go join one of these other, like they're freely saying, leave the church. If you don't think exactly like us, there's no room for you here. See, I focus on polygamy.
So I wanted to bring that up, and first of all, kind of, I guess, sort of steel man what I think you might be trying to get across there.
Can I make a point first? I feel like we're doing, this is like critique inception. We're doing like a critique of a critique of a critique of a critique. So we could also just talk about like the issues kind of fresh, but we could do this too. Anyway, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't even add up how many layers deep this goes.
Yes, and there is kind of a level to this that I thought about this, like, yeah, we got to be careful that it isn't like a critique of a critique of a critique, but at the same time, to just kind of steal on what you were getting across there. So one thing is that, you know, Hayden and I, you know, offered sharp criticism to Julie Hanks, and your feeling is that we are launching bombs and criticizing and going after her maybe personally. Did you feel like
the bomb comment was referring to something else? It was referring to specifically how I meant it in that moment was the LGBT issue. Like, okay. I you know, that's what I meant, is like something is said and then there's a reaction. And then, so that's what I was talking about specifically there. But yes, and even more than just the critique, it's kind of the attitude or the way of seeing the gospel.
Okay, so it's more the approach. Like, there may be even things that maybe you disagree with Dr. Hanks about, or maybe we have a point, but our approach to bringing it isn't the right way of doing it, because it can come across as condemning and judgmental. And is that a fair kind of summation of what you're getting at there?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, go ahead and make your point, but yeah, I feel like it's hard to sum up really fast. I think that it's a feeling of there's not room for you in this church. That's something that I have struggled with, and that I know a lot of other people, or you have to be this way, or you can't explore these ways, and it feels like you're pushed out or kicked out or not welcome, or not, you can't have space here because it's too anyway, yeah.
The only real part of that I really kind of took issue with was the characterization that we have said that if people don't think exactly like us, to quote you, that we don't think that people can be in the church unless they think exactly like us. And I don't think that we've ever said that.
Okay, that's fair. I think I'm talking more about what I see as an attitude or an approach to the gospel and to the church. And it does feel like this. And so I am, to be fair, I was thinking about it and I'm like, okay, what other times have I experienced this? Like, why does this impact me strongly when I, like you saw me, Hayden at least saw the interaction I had with Brian Hales.
I did as well. I actually watched that interview today.
Oh, okay. And I have other, so I've encountered this a lot. And then over the years, as I've explored different things that I felt led to, and you feel this, like, I don't know how many times I've been told kind of like, well, then why don't you just leave? Mm-hmm. Or there's, there is this strong sense of there's not room for you here. And so that's what I'm reacting to. I got that same sense from your videos.
So, and it's interesting. I mean, I think there's a question that is a legitimate question there. Is there any line to which a person would be better off outside the church? Or is there any scenario in which a person, we excommunicate people from the church. So obviously the institutional church at least has such a line that it has drawn, saying it's probably better that this person be outside the church than inside. Is there any line for you at which a person, and I don't, no, obviously, like if someone is like abusing children or something like that, like obviously we're all on the same page there. What I'm saying is when it comes to belief, is there any
communication for apostasy?
Yeah, or just I guess for apostasy, or is there any orthodoxy of belief, even beyond excommunicating someone, that's just like, to be a Latter-day Saint, you do need to believe X. And if you don't believe X, that you fall outside the lines?
Well, so this is such a good question. I actually talked to Patrick Mason about this and kind of pushed on him, saying, what do we have to believe? And he talked about kind of the three prongs, like the triangle. We have three kind of, the scriptures, the prophets, and my brain's fried right now, but and how many shapes can we fit in? And I think that belief is a hard one, right? Because people's beliefs transition over time if we're really seeking, right? And I guess for me, if people want to be in the church and feel that that's where God wants them and they find value there, I think if someone is disruptive, is making it so it's hard to have church at church be what it's meant to be. Like I think that it would be inappropriate to stand up in front of a congregation and say a prayer to Heavenly Mother, for example, when we've been told not to do that. To do that
one, Julie might disagree with you there.
No, not at all. She says the exact same thing. She's talking about privately. I think that if we're disrupting, like bringing too much contention or controversy to our meetings, that's something that that I would understand if a bishop was like, hey, we need to not have that happen. But as far as excommunicating people for apostasy, I can't find a line. It's really fuzzy. I think, is it John Dehlin that coined the phrase bishop roulette? There's something to that. Mm-hmm. That definitely exists. And so you can have people that get excommunicated quite quickly, or people that push the boundaries in a lot of directions and don't get excommunicated. So it's hard for me to see somewhere that the church is benefited by excommunicating people in order to silence them or to say, get back in. Like Justin Griffin made the movie Who Killed Joseph Smith, which hugely controversial, right? Mm-hmm. And he was excommunicated before he even finished the movie without, and so that's one that I'm like, okay, that was a controversy, but it caused them personal pain. I understood as I met him after the fact and learned how much pain it caused. And it's hard for me to see how that's beneficial.
So it's interesting. Well, Hayden, I'll let you. Do you have any thoughts on that you want to
Sure. Yeah. As far as like what a Latter-day Saint has to believe, I'm under the impression that it doesn't matter what a Latter-day Saint believes. More so, the church is concerned about what they're putting out into the public. So, for example, if I personally believed that Joseph Smith was not a prophet, technically I can be a member of the church and still believe that. But if I start coming out publicly and start saying he's not a prophet, here's why, and here's all the reasons why he's not a prophet, the church may take action. But if I keep it to myself, I don't see any grounds for excommunication, or as far as that's for how I understand it to be.
Well, but Hayden, wouldn't you agree though that you're not going to be able to get a temple recommend, and in fact, you wouldn't even be able to get baptized unless you were to affirm in a baptismal interview.
But logistically, though, you can still be a member, and if I was baptized when I was 8, then I can still be a member.
Yeah, I can see you won't be. In other words, you won't be excommunicated for that. Correct. However, your progression within the church would definitely be halted to some extent if you don't hold to at least the core beliefs in temple recommend interviews and or the questions in a baptismal interview. So So the way I see it is that we do have some standards of belief, but they're fairly broad. You know what I mean? Like,
and I think Hayden brought up a good point that when you're baptized at 8 and then you go on to live your life and explore, it's a different thing between wanting to be baptized into the church as an adult and being a lifetime member going, whoa, there's a lot of stuff I didn't know before. I'm trying to figure this out. I guess I'm pretty patient with people who maybe have to struggle through some of those questions they're having. I'm glad we don't say, you need to come in for your yearly, do you still get to be a member? Do you qualify? I'm glad that we allow latitude for people to figure things out.
I think the reason is the church doesn't want to kick people out. That's not the goal of the church. So it makes sense why we don't do that.
Now, that actually brings up a more fundamental question, which is the question of what is the purpose of the church? Michelle, what do you think about that? I mean, because ultimately, if we say if it's right for the church, if the church's job was to literally only find people that had a very specific belief set because that's the way you were saved or whatever, depending on what the mission of the church is, it's very hard for us to evaluate, is communication good or bad for the church unless we address the presuppositions of what we think the church exists for.
My hope is that I know we have the threefold purpose of the church. I hope that in the essence of everything, the church is to bring people to Jesus Christ, to, like Jesus condensed the whole purpose of the law to be love God and love your fellow man. And I hope that that's what we're still doing, is helping people be in connection with God and be in connection with one another. And then I think the outgrowths of that are like strengthen families, strengthen communities, strengthen people's home. I guess to me, part of coming unto Christ is coming unto ourselves, being whole, being, understanding more of what brings peace and joy and understanding the promises of the atonement and the power of the atonement. That's what I hope the essence, the core of the church is. I think that can look different ways. Like I think that there are times that but people do sometimes come up against, okay, do I have to question my faith in Jesus Christ, right? I would hope that we can provide the ministering support, latitude, and love for people to even have those difficult questions within our communion. That's my hope, is what we are doing as a church. I know that we have the preach the gospel, proclaim redeem the saints, preach the gospel, proclaim the dead, redeem the dead. You can tell I'm not a mission. I wasn't a missionary. I got married, but I know.
Well, you have, how many children do you have, real quick?
13.
You have 13. Okay, so just so you know, no matter what our disagreements are or anything, you are a hero to me for that. Okay, just so you know, I'm one of 8 kids myself, so I'm from a big family, and I know the kind of sacrifice that makes. So believe me, I walk away from here with any disagreements we may have, even very sincere, that will always be, I have a top respect. So just kind of summarize that. So your hope is that the primary function of the church is to bring people to Christ so that they can connect with one another and with Him.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then now Hayden, what would you
And with themselves. Yeah.
and with themselves? Okay. And Hayden, what do you have any thoughts on that? On that sort of a vision of what the church is? Is the church does the church have a purpose that maybe digs in deeper to that? What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, I don't have an issue with that or with a three-pronged idea. It's funny when you ask that question, like a million different thoughts went through my mind. And one of the thoughts that went through my mind, and I want to preface this by saying I reserve the right to reword this later or to change it later. But I think we could say the purpose is to come unto Christ, but and I put a huge asterisk here to not be taken out of context. I think coming unto Christ is a means to an end. In other words, it's not, Christ doesn't just want us to come unto him for the fact to come unto him. He wants us to become like him and to be exalted. So while I don't have an issue with saying coming unto Christ is the purpose of this life, I think that's fair. I think he wants something more for us. Or if I ask you, well, then why do we need to come unto Christ? I think the answer is, well, exaltation. He wants us to become like him and like our heavenly parents. So anyway, the purpose of the church, I would say, is to help us receive exaltation by coming unto Christ, maybe is the right way to say it.
And I would go even one step further. So I'll kind of take the next level to this, because I agree with you. But this is the big thing that why the church in particular matters. Okay. The church matters because of covenant relationships. Okay. The way we come unto Christ is by entering into a covenant relationship with him. It's the difference between dating my wife and marrying her, right? Like I entered into a covenant with my wife, and that changed the nature of our relationship and the level of relationship that we're able to have. And so as I view it, the church is the institution by which, through the priesthood keys, we enter into covenant relationship with the Lord. And that's why it matters. If the church didn't have the keys, I wouldn't care. I would be a Protestant. I would just, it's me and it's Jesus and we have our relationship and that's it, because I don't believe that that's necessary. And so one of the key things, and again, I'm going to see what you think on that, but one of the key things in the restored gospel is covenant. And any understanding of the church without an understanding of priesthood and of covenant relationship with God just doesn't account for what the restoration is and what the church is fundamentally. The church is not a community of people that just love each other and care about each other per se. Okay, it should be that, obviously. The church is the institution that holds the keys of the kingdom. And the people who hold those keys actually act as the foundation of the church. It's the quorum of the 12 and the president of the church. They are, when we talk about the church, in a lot of ways, we are talking about them because they, as the authorized servants of God who hold the keys of the kingdom, they're the ones who we go to enter into a covenant relationship with God. And that was the way that Christ set it up in the New Testament, was that they were the holders of the keys of the kingdom. Is that the way that you view the church? Do you view the church as the means by which we enter into covenant relationship with Christ, and that is essential to our exaltation?
Okay, this is a big question. I actually, so let me think where to begin. First of all, yeah, we definitely prioritize differently. For me, the priority is I know that Elder McConkie spoke against this, but really the personal relationship with the divine. How do I experience God in my life? How does my experience in the church help me to come to have more connection to the divine? For me, the connection is with the Lord, is with the Spirit, is with feeling it's with inspiration and revelation and connection and direction in my life. That is the core for me. That's what I spend my time teaching my children to seek and testifying to them of. So for me, it very much is the personal relationship with the divine. Without necessarily the intermediary of the church, right? I believe we all have the exact same access to God. We all have the same privilege to seek God.
Is that and I hear that. My question is that sounds a lot like Protestantism.
I think so. For me, Protestantism doesn't have the Book of Mormon. Protestantism doesn't have
Is that the prime? Would you say that their lack of the Book of Mormon is the primary difference between Protestantism and the church?
So I understand that for you, keys is this thing that you feel like you have a lot of understanding of, and that is the central important thing of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. For me, I actually wanted to do an episode of this, and I've started studying it. I started studying out keys in the scriptures. I've done that in the past too. And I think that the idea of keys is so much more complex than what I think what we kind of have handed down to us is kind of it's really easy to simplify things and oversimplify things and then teach them, and they get passed down, and then we think, oh, we understand we understand what we've been taught, and we just believe it without understanding how much more complex it is than the simplified version we've been given. So like keys are first spoke about by Isaiah. I think I have it somewhere. I think it's chapter 22. And he talks about the keys of, I believe, the house of David, right? And that's the eternal kingdom. And then keys are spoken about again in the New Testament by Jesus Christ, but even our chapter headings there make assumptions that aren't present in the text of the scriptures.
Okay.
And then
so just to summarize that, because I mean, I think that we have a whole podcast just on the nature of priesthood keys, right? So, but just to understand the distinction there is that you think that the current understanding of the key, because the way that I'm talking about keys is the way that the brethren and the authorities of the church currently talk about the keys.
Right.
And so are you saying that you fundamentally do not believe that they understand keys properly, that they have a misunderstanding of it?
I wouldn't say they. I don't like using the they because it's too easy to say I'm criticizing I think that we as a people understand less than we think that we do. I do think that we have a problem with institutional pride. I think the Book of Mormon is speaking to us. The Book of Mormon warns us of pride. If you even just stick to the Doctrine and Covenants and search keys in the Doctrine and Covenants, there are the keys of the mysteries, the keys of the kingdom, there are so many different kinds of keys, each with their own instructions and their own, and then really my understanding is, and I've known this for a long time, that whatever Joseph Smith was doing with sealings and the law of adoption, and that, was not fully understood. We've kind of inherited what we've inherited. So I think that we have a tendency to understate the complexity of these things and then overstate our understanding of them just as a people, as a tradition. And then the thing that makes me nervous about it is that keys then become a means for power or control, which to me is the opposite of what Jesus exemplifies, of what the gospel, of what God does with his people. It becomes a way that people can have power and institutional control over other people. And I think that the example I see throughout the scriptures by servants of the Lord time and time again is kind of an upheaval of those power structures.
See, and
so I know
it's interesting because Christ, I mean, I don't know that I can agree with the characterization that Christ came in to disrupt all the power structures as much as he was to implement his own kingdom. Christ came to bring a kingdom to the world and to basically undermine Babylon by implementing his own kingdom. And in his kingdom, he set up a hierarchy. I mean, this is something that is core to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, is that he called 12 apostles, the original 12 apostles, and set them up as the heads of his church. And it was very institutionalized, and they controlled, according to the way that we view the way that we view the whole thing and the restoration, is that it is indeed the authorized leadership, priesthood leadership of the church, which, by the way, and maybe this is uncomfortable for people, but Jesus chose 12 men to be his 12 apostles. He did not appoint any women, And so I know that for a lot of people, they're sort of like, well, we want women more in the hierarchy. The thing is if you actually want to model yourself after the New Testament church, that Jesus had female disciples who were very close to him and very important, and they played an important role. But it seems to me, as I look at the history, that he granted the priesthood authority to those people. And then if you even go to the Book of Mormon, again, you see that pattern repeated. And this is, when you talk about that personal relationship with God, I'm all for it, man. Like, have the personal relationship with God, but recognize that it's on his terms, not on yours. And ultimately, if I read here, like in Mosiah 18:10, Alma says, now I say unto you, if this be the desire of your hearts, this relationship that we want to have with God, what have you against being baptized in the name of the Lord as a witness before him that ye have entered into a covenant with him and will serve him and keep his commandments, that he may pour out his spirit more abundantly upon you? The call here is basically this. It's like, if you're dating, if this be the desire of your hearts, like, get married, enter into the covenant relationship with God. And the relationship talked about in Scripture very often of Christ's relationship to the church is one of marriage. And we take that in the church to see it as the relationship is that of the covenant people with God. And so that the thing is that covenants are mediated through a priesthood structure. And so whether we want to quibble exactly about the nature of keys, which is fine, my thing is that regardless, there is something that is the institution by which you enter into the covenant relationship. Or do you reject that? Do you embrace sort of a priesthood of all believers, as the Protestants do? Or do you believe that there is a priesthood structure and hierarchy that enables the covenant relationship?
It's complicated because I come at it so differently that I feel like, I'm trying to paint in pink and green, and you're setting up a grid of red and black and saying, step on the plate, so I'm trying my best to talk to you when we really are kind of in different languages or different cultures, if that makes sense, right?
I would make the distinction, though. I mean, the things that I'm talking about are very orthodox,
but how I look at it,
positions.
So,
and I would say even central to the very essence of what the restoration was.
So, well, see, I don't necessarily agree, because as I look at it, the church at the time of Christ had at least, and I would say, I don't want to set everyone off at me, say, just like Hayden, I reserve the right to stumble my way clumsily to try to make the point I'm trying to make.
I would say when doing theology and going on our own paths, you always have to be like, hey, let's not
dig a pit for a neighbor because of a word, right? And so I feel like the church at the time of Christ had a stronger claim to being the one true church of God than we have today. They had the scriptures, the temple, the priesthood rites, the priesthood, the ordinances, they had the genealogy.
The New Testament church.
Yes, at the time. No. I mean the Jews at the time of Christ. The structure, the hierarchy. They did have all of those things. They did the ordinances. They did the sacrifices. They were the children of Moses, the children of Abraham. They were literally the people of God who we are adopted in as. They were the original, right? They had
would you, because I always viewed it as that they were in a state of apostasy at that time.
Okay.
For centuries had been basically saying, hey, we're all headed towards apostasy, like repent. And then Jesus came as essentially to clean the house.
But at the time of authority. At the time of Christ, they still were recognized. Jesus was sent to the Jews. They still were recognized. Jesus stayed in the church. He continued to go to the temple. He continued to go to the ordinances. It says, like, even when Caiaphas, who was the high priest, right, which is the equivalent of the president of the church, the prophet, he testified in his calling, meaning as the prophet of God, he testified that Jesus would die, that Jesus would have to die. Nothing at all. It is necessary that one man must die for his nation, right? And it says he said that in his calling. And so I think that God has a tendency to follow patterns, right? Things repeat and we learn. And the people in that structure who were so set on, like in my studying, what I studied this years and years ago, but they had teachings that if someone comes and claims to be the Messiah, but then he's killed, then you know he was a false prophet, which was part of why it shook Peter and all of the apostles up so bad, because Jesus did this thing. And they also had teachings that if the I can't remember all the words, so I'll get it wrong, but basically, if the rabbis say the sky is purple and you look up and the sky is blue, but the rabbis say it's purple, then the sky is purple. Like it was basically you follow the leadership. I see so many similarities between our follow the prophet ideas and theirs and our structure today. And what concerns me, when I started, the first thing I actually became alerted to was our idea of sort of prophetic infallibility. We claim we don't believe that, but we say follow the prophet and you're not allowed to disagree with our leaders. We kind of believe in this. And I started to see that as a spiritually dangerous thing, not even having a reason, not even having anything I disagreed with church leaders on, just that central teaching. And in part because the people at the time of Christ who were so focused on the institution, right? The Pharisees were saying, who do you think you are? Look who we are. We are the ones. And all of the people that said, they're the ones. Who is this guy? And not only that, he came and he broke the rules. He did things that they, in their morality, thought were wrong. So the concern I have, let me just say this right now. The concern I have is that people that were more focused on the institution than on what Jesus was teaching, what the Spirit was teaching them, they missed it, right? They'll crucify him. And that's my concern today.
So, first of all, you have a big ally in me in the no blind obedience. Like, I'm not a blind obedience guy. I very much am against that. So you have a friend in me there. The one thing that I'll say before I give this over to you, Hayden, because I'm sure you have some thoughts on it, is, well, two quick points. Number one, I don't see Jesus as, a lot of people say Jesus was a rebel. He was undermining the authorities of his day. But Jesus was not, he was the authority. Like he was the one that they're all accountable to. And he came in and said, I'm not even speaking of myself. I represent the Father here. And he said, and so Jesus was actually asserting his own authority on an apostate group. This is my sort of take on the history, and was essentially purifying the apostasy that had gone rank amongst the covenant people of God.
But if we were alive in that day, we would be pointing to that church saying they're the ones with the authority, they're the ones with the callings, they're the ones with the priesthood and the temple.
If the church was in a state of apostasy, I'd be on your team. I would say the church is in a state of apostasy, and therefore we need something to change.
For me, apostasy is a tricky word because apostasy isn't really a destination, it's a direction. Are we in a state of apostasy, meaning we're going away from God, or are we coming to and receiving more and more? And the Book of Mormon warns us that we are under condemnation for not having received more. If we were continuing to go to God, we would be receiving more. The Doctrine and Covenants warns us that we're under condemnation. Once we start, like we kind of think we're in a holding pattern, right? And
that's the thing. So, that if the church, because I don't look at the church as being in a state of apostasy, even in that sense. I believe the church is being guided in the right direction. It's not a perfectly linear path. I think we make mistakes, but like I trust that the leadership of the church is guiding the church towards Zion. And
do you disagree with the Book of Mormon and the Doctrine and Covenants that the church is under condemnation, and that if we were doing what we were supposed to be, we would be receiving more light and knowledge, more scripture, more the sealed portion?
I think to a certain extent, yes, we're always under a certain level of condemnation for our own sins and weaknesses that exist, whether individually or as a group. Now, I want to get Hayden in here, though. I feel bad. We've been going back and forth here, but Hayden,
no, I was going to say, this is in no way a debate, right? This is a discussion, but I'm hoping you guys will let me play moderator here for just a second. And this often happens. And by the way, Michelle, you'll find that me and Jacob, we agree on a lot, but we also disagree on a lot. And that's part of this show. But just to find some common ground between what you guys are saying, I see, and just to be transparent, I see Jacob trying to draw lines in trying to ask you, Michelle, kind of what you believe, and you're not really answering the questions, to be frank, right? You're kind of saying, well, I'm still wrestling with this, I'm still learning. So can I ask you a couple questions and this is simply to understand where you're coming from, because your answers to these questions or lack of answers, I think will help us to understand why we're having a disagreement here in the first place. And Jacob, if you want to answer these questions as well, right? But the first question is, do you believe that President Nelson holds the active presiding keys, the same keys that Christ gave to his apostles? Like, are we on that same page together?
Well, yes. Just
Okay.
like I believe that Caiaphas held the keys. And
Okay,
I'm
so-
not comparing President Nelson to Caiaphas. Yes, I do believe that there's a structure and an order. I believe that God sent Christ to the Jews because they were his covenant people.
Okay.
Right?
Do you-
I think that saying that he holds the keys doesn't mean that we're right on everything and that we haven't,
And
that
we
we've gotten everything
we
wrong.
don't hold that position either.
No.
So one thing that I want to be very careful is that we don't get painted as that, if you say that, I don't think they're always right. Well, we don't think they're always right either. I think that the more fundamental question, well, I'll leave it back to you, Hayden.
So that's good, right? So that shows you, and that's good for us to clarify. We do believe in modern revelation. We do believe things can change, right? That's the purpose of modern revelation. My next question for you is do you believe that those keys are used to administer essential saving ordinances such as baptism and temple ordinances? Like, do you believe those are, because when he first asked you about the purpose of the church, you said divine connection with the divine, and Jacob seems to be kind of pressing this need for covenants, and I haven't heard you comment yet on if you agree with him or not on that. Do you believe that the covenants are essential for salvation and exaltation?
The ordinances, is that
Yeah.
kind of, you're talking about the ordinances?
Baptism, initiatory, endowment, temple sealing.
Right. So I will say, yeah, well, this is the way that I started understanding ordinances for myself quite a few years ago, was that I believe that ordinances are, and like I said, I'm still, thinking through things, and, this isn't the core of where my faith is, right? This isn't the core of my experience with the divine. So this is what I believe, but it's not where I have certainty, if that makes sense.
Sure.
But I believe that, that ordinances are, how I described it today was symbolic invitations into spiritual events, into spiritual realities. I think that when we are baptized and confirmed as an 8-year-old and we are told to receive the Holy Ghost, that is telling, I don't think that we are necessarily at that point baptized by fire and filled with, right? I believe that it's teaching us our potential and what we should be seeking. And so I think that when we are married in the temple, I don't think that a couple that's young, immature, just happened to get married in the right place by the right people. I think that
Sure.
it's telling us of a possibility that we can experience the Holy Spirit of promise and being sealed by God.
Sure. I was going to say that actually. The stance of the church is that your ordinances don't mean you're saved, but my question is, are they essential? Do you believe someone can be saved without baptism or exalted without sealing?
Yeah, I that's complicated for me. I think that I understand the LDS perspective. I'm not as I used to believe that absolutely. I'm no
Okay.
longer that black and white and like I mentioned on Midnight Mormons. My experience with my daughters
Right.
makes
Sure.
me feel like that's not someone else's power to take away from me. I know my girls, and so it's hard for me to say, well, and then if we actually believe that, if we actually believe that we have the power given to us, Christ says, I keep no servant there. Like Christ does say it's individual between God, between him and us. And so if we have an institution of man, even if it is God's institution, come in and say, hey, if you disagree with me on certain things, and speak out about it, or if I happen to feel the need to excommunicate you, then I sever you from God and I sever you from your family. That doesn't at this point ring true to me.
If that were the way that it actually worked, that the institution could sever me from God, even though I desired God and God desired me, like I don't believe that that's what happens in the church in any way. I don't think the church can stop you from God and God from you. I think what the church is meant to do is to tell you that you have severed your connection from God, and that it's as if God's prophet is telling you that God has told them that you've severed their connection with God. It's the equivalent of, one of the Old Testament prophets going to the people saying, well, we love God, we're all about God, but it's like, but you're not doing what he wants. Christ himself said that there will be many who cry, Lord, Lord, but do not what he asks, and therefore he does not know them. And so the way I see an excommunication isn't someone being kicked out of the church. It's the authorities of the church telling people that they've wandered outside of it, that they've broken their covenants with God, that they have in effect cheated on the Lord. And they're basically telling you where you're at, not necessarily saying, hey, I'm cutting you off. And so
I don't think that's how it's generally taught or understood. I mean, I think that it is the excommunication itself that people think has the power, just like the ordinances have the power. So I think I appreciate your perspective on it. I don't think that that's the general consensus. I don't think that's how.
And if it isn't, then I wish that it would be, because in the disciplinary councils that I've been involved in myself and things like that, there very much is not it is not an angry, I want to rip somebody up. It's very much, we want to help you to reconnect with the Lord. And it's more of a,
yeah, but it sometimes can also be, we want to silence you.
And maybe,
like Brian Hills was talking to me about, that the members could be confused if I speak publicly about something that God has told me to do. He disagrees with that. So, so if it like I know what I would do if I were given an ultimatum. I would follow God, and God has told me that if it ever came to that point, I would be told what to do. But if God did tell me to leave my things up instead of taking them down, and I was following God,
oh, of course. Then, here's the thing: if it was God, no one here is going to say like you got to go with the church if God tells you otherwise. Okay, like
right, but they do say then you're deceived. We leave it upon ourselves.
Yeah, I would have, as a Latter-day Saint, if I had someone telling me that I can walk away from my covenants, I don't think that that's the same God who told me to be faithful to my covenants, even up to giving up my life to keep faithful to my covenants. I mean, what Jesus Christ asked of his people was everything, and to keep their covenants. So anytime someone says something that seems otherwise is just, I don't know. It's very difficult for me. And I actually, on that note, because I think we're starting to get to maybe some of the differences here that I'm seeing. You had your interview with Dr. Hanks, who you just released today, and you guys were talking about something that I think kind of echoes back to what we just have been talking about. And I wanted to play the clip, and then I wanted to get your thoughts on it and see if that's still sort of if that aligns with what we were just talking about, right? And following God and following what you feel in your heart and that kind of stuff. So let me pull this up real quick. It'll just take me a second. And let's check this out. Oops, click the wrong button there.
Michelle, is there anything you want to add before we jump into this?
Yeah, I think that well, I mean, yeah, you can play the clip. I do think just as what we're talking about, I'm hearing a difference between, does the church serve me, or am I dependent on the church? Do I need the church? And for me, that is kind of a fear approach. Like if you don't have the church, then you don't get all of these things and you're cut off. And that's that power that I'm talking about that doesn't resonate with me. Right. And so like I have two daughters who are not in the church. And I think the worst thing I could do is be trying to get them back into the church. Right. That and we could talk about that more.
No, and I frankly, so just so you know, Michelle, I have 8 siblings, or there's 8 of us in my family, 8 of my siblings. I'm the only one who's still active in the church. All of my siblings have left. And in my extended family of I have 55 plus cousins and my dad is one of 8 kids, and everyone was active. There's probably only about 30% of them are left active in the church. And so, and believe me, I don't go around bashing them. There's a difference between, in ministry and the way that you effectively minister to those who have left. But also I would, I'm not going to say that it's anything less than a serious spiritual tragedy when someone abandons their covenants. So here, let me pull this up. It's 147. There it is, right here. Let me play this. I'm going to mute my mic real quick.
In between. So I am not trying to lead people. I mean, why would I lead people? I'm still in. Like, why would I lead people?
And just real quick for context, she was talking about like, okay, is she trying to lead people out of the church? And just so everyone is clear, I do not actually believe that Julie Hanks is intentionally trying to lead people out of the church. My position is that some of her ideas can make people comfortable with leaving the church and or feel that it's, that, hey, that's an acceptable path. So let's get into it.
Wow. And I respect people who choose to leave too. And that really bothers some people because I'm like, that's a legitimate choice. There are good reasons to leave.
Do you agree with that? That it's a morally legitimate choice to leave the church and that there are good reasons to break your covenants?
See, I think that the way that you approach it is so different from the way that I do that it's really difficult. I think that if it is true that we are absolutely and utterly dependent on the church for our connection to God, for our salvation, for our eternal progression, then man is the church under massive condemnation. For example, we basically made it so we have no black members. We have people that have been so faithful and come back into the church, but we had a lot of black pioneers that crossed the plains. Their descendants didn't stay because of our failure. I strongly believe that. So if we are going to, and that's just one of so many examples, if we're on the one hand going to say, you have to be in the church or it's on you and you have to bear the brunt of the condemnation for leaving, right? And you forfeit all of these blessings and you have to be accountable to that, man, are we in trouble? Mm-hmm. And so I don't tend to believe that God looks through the same lens as the sort of black and white, inflexible Mormon lens of in or out. And it's either all of the blessings or none of them. Well, I just don't.
Is there a binary between either you have made the covenant and are striving to keep it or not? Because ultimately, that's why I keep going back to the covenant thing. The covenant thing is very binary. You either have made it and you're trying to keep it, or you have not.
Well, there are covenants I've made directly with God. There are times when I have felt inspired with something that I am called to do or something that I have promised to do, or like covenants like that. Those covenants are huge for me. If I've covenanted to God to do something, I'm going to do it, right? That was the nature of the covenant that God made with Abraham. Our ordinances are echoes of those things according to our understanding. But no, I think that we have a lot to figure out just with regard to gay people in the church. I don't have the answers, and I believe in ongoing revelation, and I would love it if our prophets, seers, and revelators were receiving the answers, but I know that I have received a lot of direction and answers from God, and sometimes things that are spoken by our leaders are like less inspired than things that I've received. I know that's a harsh thing to say, but I have had that experience multiple times. And so if we have people, to me, one of the answers I've had is part of the reason that we have gay brothers and sisters, and this is just one of so many examples, is to help shake us out of our complacency, to teach us more, to give us opportunities to seek greater light and knowledge. There are things that we don't yet understand and that we don't have good answers to. And so if I'm really uncomfortable saying that's your problem, that's your fault, and not taking the responsibility on ourselves. If the church is absolutely, utterly necessary, no way around it, then we're in a lot of trouble because we have done and continue to do a lot of things wrong as members and as an institution.
So I guess I honestly, genuinely have a hard time distinguishing sort of the basic tenet of Protestantism with the viewpoint that you have, with the exception of the Book of Mormon or maybe doctrinal things. You know, at the end of the day, if it's a personal relationship and I can personally make covenants in the church, essentially is not necessary. This is essentially the same argument that Martin Luther was making against the Catholic Church. He was saying, you are not the mediator between me and God. And so that was what caused the entire Protestant Reformation. And,
right. Do you think the Catholic Church was right? Or do you think Martin Luther was right?
Well, that's the thing. I believe that Martin Luther was right because he was railing against an apostate organization. And
so the only measurement we have is what institution you happen to believe is apostate or not. The Catholic Church was still teaching about Jesus Christ. They were still teaching that they kept the scriptures going for it. The Catholic Church did a whole lot of good.
Yes,
a whole lot of good. So
I'm actually a big fan of Catholicism.
but I'm just saying, apostasy is a complicated word, right?
Not from the perspective of priesthood keys, because an institution that
Peter claimed, the Catholic Church claims the keys through Peter. They have a claim.
No, I agree. I think that their claim fails. Otherwise, I'd be a Catholic. I wouldn't be a Protestant, because I think that it's very clear in the New Testament that Jesus Christ did establish a church with a hierarchical priesthood authority.
When you say hierarchical, I find that interesting because Jesus very clearly taught, be the servant. Whoever is the highest is the lowest, right? Be the servant of all. There are talking about these similarities. I mean, it's interesting to me how he talks about they love the salutations in the marketplace and the chief seats in the synagogues, and that, and that is how we are structured. I mean,
I agree.
Those 12 red velvet chairs, 15 red velvet chairs. It's hard to not go, okay, what's going on here? I see echo.
Right. And I do think that there's a legitimate critique there that sometimes you get kind of weird prophet worship or apostle worship that I think is unhealthy. However,
I think you're understating that. I think you're saying sometimes you kind of get this weird thing. I think that is what we are set up to do. There's a level of
respect in the scriptures that the people had or should have for Moses or for Peter, because of the nature, not of who they are, but of their calling, and that they should be respected in their calling to a certain extent. But you're right. The greatest of all is the servant, and they are called to serve in the church in their capacity of basically being over the entire church. Now, before you and I keep going, I want to bring Hayden in. Sorry, Hayden, you're kind of coming in a little choppy. I hope your audio is coming in clear.
Oh, yeah, I can hear you guys fine. Sorry if my internet's maybe not catching it.
No, you're good. What are your thoughts?
I think this is good. I mean, this is an insightful conversation. I'm just glad because Michelle, I see your stuff online all the time, right? I mean, you're on my feed, and I don't always comment. Sometimes I do, but I'm just glad to have an opportunity for you to explain and for us to explain our position. I'm getting a little bit better understanding. I do have one question, and I don't know. This is a short little tangent. When we talk about the purpose of the church, right, we're kind of hovering in this priesthood keys and the purpose of prophets and all these things. Curious to know, just a brief little tangent, but I promise it's related. How do you feel about the practice instituted by Joseph Smith for baptisms for the dead? Because I'm having a hard time kind of making the connection between. I haven't heard you yet say, yes, baptism is essential for salvation, right? You've kind of said the opposite, like that's what you used to believe. When it comes to practices instituted by the prophet Joseph Smith himself, because this wasn't Brigham Young, right? They've been doing this since Joseph. What's your take on the essential nature of baptism in regards to baptisms for the dead? Because I think this is another branch, if you will, of clarification we can make between purpose of keys, essentiality of covenants. Because that's what I hear this conversation is. Jacob is saying covenants are essential and you got to make and keep your covenants. And I hear you kind of saying, and you got to do that through the church. And I hear you kind of saying, not necessarily. So tell me what you think about that.
Yeah, I feel like, and you guys are expert debaters. So, the number one rule of debate is control the questions. And you guys are doing that very well. So you are like I feel like it's a little bit, I'm very uncomfortable in this territory because this isn't where I would say the essential things are what Christ taught, are charity. You can have all of these other things, and if you have not charity, ye are nothing, right? So that's where I put my focus is every day, God, what do you want me to do today? what am I here to do today? Who can I serve? Who can I love? What can I do? That's what I spend my effort and my time in, right? And so that is for me what this is about, is how can I best exemplify in my weak ability, exemplify Jesus Christ in my interactions with my fellow man, with my children, with my husband, with my neighbors, with whoever I feel inspired to do. That is my gospel, my religion. So all of these things.
FYI, yes, my thing is
So-
it's a yes and.
Right. And so for me, these other questions are things I explore. I talk with my husband about these things. We go the rounds. I don't have certainty. So this isn't my area of, like, I feel a little bit like there's the possibility of painting me into a corner and showing me as an apostate when it's just not how I view it, right? Because you guys view it so, what's the word I'm looking for? Can't think of the word, but the opposite of theoretical. You're so concrete. You view it in this way, in such concrete terms, and I don't. And so I'm doing my best to engage with you, but this isn't where my focus would be. I have some questions I want to follow with you. So I would say I do believe that baptism is essential, mainly because Jesus was baptized, right? So I've talked to my husband about this, like, what does this mean? And I don't, on the one hand, think, oh, we can throw out ordinances, we can throw out baptisms for the dead. I don't think that, but I also don't think, oh, if we don't do it, then we're in trouble. I know that in the early days of the church, and I see so much of what happened in the early days of the church is so confused. I'm learning more and more and more how tricky and messed up all of that is. Who said that Joseph Smith said that? How do we really know? There's a lot that's confusing. But I know that at one time it was believed that if you didn't get married in this life, too bad, it was done. That's one of the justifications for polygamy, is people need to be married in this life or they don't have an opportunity. And that's why we do sealings, because there's no opportunity. But now we say, any blessing that is denied to you in this life, you will have the next life. So we teach an exact opposite of that, and teach single people in the church today that no blessing will be denied them in the next life. So we teach exactly the opposite. So I think it's okay to say, yeah, I certainly don't know the answers to these things. And I think we as an institution know less than we claim to know. Right? And that's why it's hard for me to have it be so concrete.
Sure. I appreciate your answer. And I hope you understand. Truly, my intent is to really understand where you're coming from, and because there is some differences here, right? Now, I'm also not going to fault you for saying I'm still working through it, right? I mean, there are lots of things I could say that for. Are there, and I don't know, Jacob, where you want to go, but Michelle, if you have questions for us.
That's what I was going to say. I want to be very, very clear here. We want to allow you, if you want to ask us how we address some of these hard questions, frankly, because it seems very clear to me that there are a lot of issues that you're wrestling with. And frankly, we all have issues that we wrestle with and we're trying to sort out. But yeah, fire back here and we'll do our best to try and maybe provide our insight as to how we deal with things that maybe are challenging.
Okay. And I don't have that many questions to ask. I do have this. I have a couple, but